I knew you'd call me out. Mr. Reicher, how much would what's the differential in the interest rate that these companies can get because of the loan guarantee versus if they had to go into the private market and borrow the money? Or is it such that some of these projects are so risky nobody would loan them the money?
That is the big challenge, Congressman. Some of these projects have enough commercialization risk, scaling up for the very first time to a full-scale utility project, that often you can't get a bank to make you a loan. If you can get a bank to make you a loan, here's the problem. Not only will they charge you a pretty high interest rate, but they'll give you a very short term for the loan. That doesn't work when you go out to get a power purchase agreement. You got to pay back the whole thing in 5 or 6 years. So that's why this very targeted program exists.
Isn't that where venture equity would play? Because, you know, I had a startup, and I went to banks, and they weren't going to loan me the money. And so I went to the venture capitalists. And if you think the terms of the DOE are tough, you should check out the venture capitalists.
Fair enough. Here's the answer to that, in my view. Venture capitalists invest small amounts of money in very high-risk situations. They are investing in the early stage of these technologies. They've come out of the lab, and you want to build the first demonstration projects. They are definitely not the sort that are going to put big amounts of money into actually scaling it up. So this notion that the venture capital world is somehow going to scale up these big energy projects for the first time, that's not what they do.
Well, you know, what's also true about venture capital is they fully expect a lot of their programs to fail.
Yeah.
But since this is not how it's structured for the taxpayer, you know, a venture capitalist can write off 9 failures with 1 good success. But because the taxpayer, and I'm not arguing that the DOE should become a capital investment firm, but because the taxpayer has such, they just lose 1-to-1 on all the 9 losses, and then they win back 1-to-1 on the win. If it were an equity investment, that's why this works in an equity you know, environment and not in a loan environment. And I think some of these programs are so risky that no bank would loan you the money, and for good reason, and nobody would loan you the money unless they had an equity stake and a chance at a multiple return on this. Dr. York, do you want to speak to this?
I think what you're illustrating is what I described as the way capital moves in these regards, and that is they know the program exists. They're going to often wait either for not just loan guarantees, they're also going to wait for grants and larger scale loans. So with due respect to Mr. Reicher, I think that, yeah, he's right in describing what venture capitalists have done, but in large part that's a construction of both the regulatory and the subsidy system that exists today.
Ms. Katz?
Yes, I would just add that the spread between the interest rates that DOE may offer and the private market does, that's just one of a number of types of differences. There's a long list. I can tell you that there are longer maturities than private loans. There are deferrals of interest. There are allowances and grace periods. There are waivers or reductions of loan fees, higher loan amounts relative to the enterprise value. So there's you know, just a variety of elements on which they vary. They're different than the government loans are different than the private sector.
But at some cost to the taxpayer.
Well, there's always a cost to the taxpayer, in part because of the accounting method that the federal government uses. What they do is they try to determine what the actual cost of the loan is in the present value. That is what, you know, all of the future payments are going to bring in versus the cost. And I'll try not to get too technical, but what the federal government does is it ties the interest rate that they use in that calculation to treasuries, which is a below market interest rate. So it appears that the loan or the loan guarantee, the time the money is out, is actually costing less than it really does.
So some of the costs are hidden, or
in part.
Yeah. Mr. Edwards, would you like to speak to this at all?
No, I think Diane hit it on the
Okay.
head.
Well, I'll yield back 7 seconds to the chairman then. Thank you.
I think